Tonight, the boundaries between present and past dissolve like mist over ancient waters. Feel the air heavy with sea salt and mystery, where each wave breaking on the shore carries echoes of navigators long forgotten. If this journey touches your soul, join us again and whisper from where you listen to us. Now, let the light dim. Breathe deeply. Let us dream with memories that are not our own. I walk through the mists of time, where official history crumbles like wet parchment. The year is 1492, but this date we learned in school is merely a convenient illusion, a sweet lie we tell to simplify the incomprehensible. The truth is far older, far more complex, woven with threads of adventure that stretch across centuries before Christopher Columbus was even born. I feel the weight of centuries on my shoulders as I watch the Atlantic stretch endlessly before me. How many brave or desperate navigators crossed these waters before the famous Genoese? How many footprints were erased by the tides of official history? The wind whispers forgotten names: Life, Zheng He, Polynesian navigators whose names were lost among the stars that guided them. America was not discovered in 1492. It was rediscovered, reconquered, rewritten. For millennia, indigenous peoples walked these lands, built civilizations, observed the same stars that guided the first visitors across the oceans. But even among the foreigners, Columbus arrived late to the party. I touch a moss-covered stone on the coast of Newfoundland, and it tells me secrets of Viking fires lit 1,000 years ago. I hear the echo of axes cutting wood to build turf houses, the sound of Norse voices arguing in a language that time has nearly erased. Leif Erikson was here. His men were here. They left their marks on the land. But the Vikings were not alone. Across the Pacific, Polynesian navigators, masters of the oceans who made Europeans look like children playing in puddles, crossed impossible distances, guided only by stars and ancestral intuition. They touched the shores of South America centuries before any European dreamed of lands beyond the horizon. The irony makes me smile bitterly. Columbus died believing he had reached the Indies, never knowing he had stumbled upon entire continents. Meanwhile, other navigators, Vikings, Polynesians, perhaps even Chinese, already knew these lands, had already mapped their coasts in their minds and hearts. I close my eyes and see secret maps circulating in Genoese taverns decades before Columbus's voyage. Sailors whisper about lands beyond Greenland, about coasts rich in timber and furs. Knowledge flows like spilled wine, staining official history with inconvenient truths. The question that haunts me is not who discovered America first. It was the first humans who crossed the Bering Land Bridge thousands of years ago. The real question is, who were the first visitors from other continents to touch these shores? And why were their stories buried under layers of myth and political convenience? Perhaps we will never know all the names, all the dates. Perhaps it is better this way. There is a melancholic beauty in imagining ghost ships crossing oceans of time, leaving only whispers and fragments of evidence for future archaeologists to discover.
The wind shifts direction, bringing aromas of distant lands and lost epochs. I feel I am about to embark on a journey through centuries of navigation, discovery, and rediscovery. A journey where each wave tells a different story, where each star guided brave navigators to unknown shores. America was discovered many times, by many people in many ways. Tonight, we will follow their footprints across the waters of time. The parchment crackles beneath my fingers like autumn leaves, its edges brown with age and salt spray. I am in a monastery library in Iceland, surrounded by the musty scent of old leather and ink made from crushed berries. The year could be 1200, or perhaps 1300. Time moves differently here, where stories live longer than the men who tell them. Before me lies the saga of the Greenlanders, written in Old Norse runes that dance across the page like tiny warriors marching toward battle. These are not mere stories, though scholars for centuries dismissed them as fantasy. These are memories preserved in amber, testimonies of voyages that changed the world long before the world knew it had been changed. I trace the words with my finger, feeling the rough texture of vellum made from calfskin. Leif Erikson sailed from Greenland, the saga whispers, and found a land where grapes grew wild and salmon leaped in rivers clear as crystal. The scribes who wrote these words had never seen such abundance. Iceland and Greenland were harsh mistresses, lands of ice and stone, where survival was a daily negotiation with death. The candlelight flickers, casting dancing shadows on the monastery walls. I can almost hear the voice of the saga teller, an old man with weathered hands and eyes like winter seas, speaking to a circle of listeners huddled around a fire. His voice carries the weight of truth, the kind of truth that survives because it must. Because forgetting would be a betrayal of those who risked everything to bring these stories home. These oral traditions stretch back through generations like an unbroken chain of memory. Each saga teller added his own flourishes, his own interpretations, but the core remained constant. Vikings had sailed west beyond Greenland and found lands rich with timber, game, and strange new peoples. The stories were too specific, too detailed, too consistent across different sources to be mere fantasy. Bjarni Herjolfsson saw the land first, the saga continues, but he did not set foot upon it. He was a cautious man, more concerned with reaching his father in Greenland than with exploring unknown shores. How different history might have been if Bjarni had been more curious, less dutiful. But perhaps it is fitting that the first European to see America was a man who chose not to claim it, who saw it only as an obstacle between himself and home. The saga describes Bjarni's journey in remarkable detail, how he was blown off course by storms while sailing from Iceland to Greenland, how he saw 3 different coastlines but refused to land because they did not match his father's description of Greenland's mountains and glaciers. His crew begged him to explore, to replenish their supplies. But Bjarni was a merchant, not an explorer. He had cargo to deliver and a reputation to maintain. Years later, when Bjarni told his story in Greenland, young Leif Erikson listened with the hunger of a born adventurer. The saga tells us that Leif bought Bjarni's ship, the very vessel that had first glimpsed American shores, and retraced the merchant's route in reverse, determined to set foot on the lands that Bjarni had only observed from a distance. The saga of Eric the Red tells a different version, as all good stories should. Here, life's discovery is more deliberate, more heroic. He sails west from Greenland with 35 men, following rumors and dreams. They find 3 lands: Helluland, the land of flat stones; Marketland, the land of forests; and Vinland, the land of wine and plenty. I close my eyes and see their ship cutting through gray-green waters, its square sail billowing with wind that tastes of ice and possibility. The men are nervous. They have sailed beyond the edge of their known world, into waters where sea monsters might dwell, and the ocean might simply end, spilling them into the void. But Leif stands at the prow, red hair streaming behind him, eyes fixed on the horizon, with the certainty of a man who has seen the future in his dreams.
The ship itself is a marvel of Viking engineering, a Nör built for long ocean voyages rather than coastal raiding. Its shallow draft allows it to navigate rivers and beach on unknown shores, while its flexible construction helps it ride the massive swells of the North Atlantic. The crew knows every plank, every rope, every sail stitch. Their lives depend on this wooden shell that carries them across the whale road. The sagas speak of Freydis, life's half-sister, a woman fierce as any warrior. She leads her own expedition to Vinland, and the saga does not shy away from the violence that follows. There is murder and betrayal, the kind of human darkness that follows explorers like a shadow. The New World, even in these earliest accounts, is not paradise. It is simply another place where humans must grapple with their own nature. Freydis's story is particularly haunting. She convinces 2 Icelandic brothers to join her expedition, promising to share the profits equally. But once in Vinland, she turns against them, claiming they have broken their agreement. In the end, she orders the murder of the brothers and their men, even wielding an axe herself to kill the women in their party. The saga-teller does not judge her actions, merely records them with the cold precision of a court scribe. What strikes me most about these ancient texts is their matter-of-fact tone. The saga writers do not present these voyages as miraculous or world-changing. To them, sailing west from Greenland to find new land is simply what Vikings do. They explore, they settle, they adapt, or they die. There is no sense that they are discovering anything, merely that they are extending the boundaries of their world, as their ancestors extended them when they sailed from Norway to Iceland, from Iceland to Greenland. The monastery bell tolls midnight, its bronze voice echoing through stone corridors. I think of all the copies of these sagas that were lost, burned by Christian zealots who saw pagan stories as threats to salvation, or simply crumbled to dust in forgotten libraries. How many other accounts of pre-Columbian contact vanished into the silence of history? The survival of these particular sagas is itself miraculous. They were written during Iceland's golden age of literature, when the island's isolation paradoxically made it a repository of Norse culture and memory. While the rest of Scandinavia was forgetting its pagan past, Iceland's saga writers were preserving it in meticulous detail. But some stories refuse to die. They survive in fragments, in half-remembered songs,
in the genetic memory of peoples who carry the ocean in their blood. The sagas of Iceland are just one thread in a tapestry of exploration that spans continents and centuries, a tapestry that official history has tried to reduce to a single thread. Columbus, 1492, the end. The wind outside the monastery walls carries the scent of the sea, and I imagine it is the same wind that filled Leif's sail 1,000 years ago. Time is a circle here, and the past is never truly past. It lives in these words, in these stories, in the stubborn insistence of truth to survive even when it is inconvenient. Tomorrow I will follow life's wake across the North Atlantic to a place where Viking fires once burned on American soil. The aurora borealis dances across the Greenland sky like the breath of sleeping gods, green and gold ribbons weaving through star-drunk darkness. I stand on the rocky shore of Brattahlid, Eric the Red's settlement, where the wind carries whispers of ice and ambition. The year is around 1000 AD, and I am watching a young man whose dreams will reshape the world's understanding of itself. Leif Erikson is 25, perhaps 30. Age matters less here than the fire in his eyes.
His red hair catches the aurora's glow as he stares westward across the Davis Strait, toward waters that most men believe lead only to the edge of existence. But life has heard Bjarni Herjolfsson's tale too many times to dismiss it as sailor's fancy. Somewhere beyond that horizon lie lands that Bjarni saw but dared not explore. The settlement around us is a testament to Viking stubbornness and ingenuity. Eric the Red, Leif's father, established this foothold on the edge of the world after being exiled from Iceland for murder. He called this harsh land Greenland in what might have been history's first real estate marketing scheme, hoping the name would attract settlers to what was mostly ice and stone. Yet somehow, impossibly, it worked. Families came, bringing sheep and cattle, carving out lives in a landscape that seemed designed to kill them. I watch life's breath mist in the frigid air as he speaks with his companions. These are not the berserkers of popular imagination, foam-flecked warriors drunk on battle rage. These are practical men, farmers, craftsmen, traders, who happen to be the finest sailors in the world. They discuss wind patterns and ocean currents with the casual expertise of people whose ancestors have been reading the sea's moods for generations. The ship they're preparing is a Nor, broader and deeper than the sleek longships used for raiding. This vessel is built for cargo and long voyages, its hull curved like a woman's hip, designed to ride the massive swells of the North Atlantic rather than fight them. Every plank has been carefully selected, every joint sealed with tar and animal hair. The sail is woven from the finest wool, waterproofed with fish oil until it gleams like sealskin. Life runs his hand along the ship's gunwale, feeling for imperfections that could mean death in the unforgiving waters ahead. His touch is reverent, almost tender.
This ship will carry him beyond the known world, and he trusts it with the absolute faith that only comes from understanding exactly how something is made. The crew gathers around him, 35 men who have volunteered to sail into legend. There's Tyrker, Leif's foster father, a German who taught him to read the stars and judge the weather. There's Thorhall the hunter, who knows every animal track in Greenland and can find fresh water by the smell of the wind. Each man brings skills that might mean the difference between discovery and death. They load the ship with careful precision: dried fish and meat, barrels of fresh water, tools for building and repair, weapons for hunting and defense. But they also pack seeds and livestock, because Leif is not planning a mere exploration. He intends to establish a settlement, to plant Viking roots in whatever soil they find. The night before departure, the settlement gathers for a feast that tastes of farewell and hope in equal measure. The ale flows freely, and the skald, the settlement's poet, recites the old stories of exploration and adventure. He tells of Garda the Swede, who first circumnavigated Iceland, and of Floki Vilgedarson, who followed ravens to find new land. These tales are more than entertainment. They are instruction manuals for the impossible, proof that the ocean's horizons can be crossed by men with sufficient courage and skill. Leif's mother, Thjodhild, watches her son with the complex expression of a woman who has already lost too much to the sea's hunger. She converted to Christianity after Eric's exile, building Greenland's first church despite her husband's pagan objections. Now she presses a small wooden cross into Leif's palm, whispering prayers in a mixture of Old Norse and Latin. The old gods and the new mingle in her blessing, as they do in so many aspects of Viking life during this time of transition. Eric the Red himself is notably absent from the farewell preparations.
The old warrior, now past his prime, had planned to lead this expedition himself, but his horse stumbled on the way to the ship, throwing him to the ground, an omen so clear that even Eric could not ignore it. "It is not my fate to discover more lands than this Greenland," he said, nursing his bruised pride along with his injuries. As dawn breaks over the settlement, painting the ice-covered mountains in shades of rose and gold, Leif and his crew push their ship into the dark waters of Eriksfjord. The aurora has faded, but its memory lingers in the sky like a promise. The men row steadily, their breath forming clouds in the cold air, until they clear the fjord and can raise their sail. The wind fills the wool canvas with a sound like thunder, and suddenly they are flying across the waves, spray cascading over the bow as the ship finds its rhythm. Leif stands at the steering oar, his eyes fixed on the western horizon, where Barney claimed to have seen unknown shores. Behind them, Greenland shrinks to a line of white peaks against the sky. Ahead lies the unknown, waters that no European has deliberately crossed, lands that exist only in one man's memory and another man's dreams. The crew settles into the routine of ocean sailing, watching for weather signs, adjusting the sail, taking turns at the oar when the wind fails. But this is no ordinary voyage. With each mile they travel west, they are sailing deeper into history, toward a meeting with a continent that will change everything. Leif doesn't know it yet, but he is about to become the first European to set foot on American soil, 5 centuries before Columbus will claim the same honor. The ship cuts through the swells like a knife through silk, carrying its cargo of ambition and courage toward a destiny that will echo through the ages. In the distance, whales breach and dive, as if saluting these bold sailors who dare to challenge the ocean's vastness.
Tonight, they will sleep under foreign stars, dreaming of the lands that wait beyond tomorrow's horizon. The morning mist clings to Newfoundland's northern coast like the breath of ancient spirits, reluctant to release its secrets to the warming sun. I kneel beside a depression in the earth at Lonzo Meadows, my fingers tracing the outline of stones that once formed the foundation of a Norse hall. These rocks have kept their vigil for 1,000 years, patient guardians of a truth that the world forgot and then remembered again. The silence here is profound, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the rocky shore and the cry of seabirds wheeling overhead. But if I listen carefully, closing my eyes and letting my imagination drift backward through the centuries, I can almost hear the echoes of voices speaking Old Norse, the ring of hammer on anvil, the crackle of fires that warmed Viking hearts in this strange new land. This place was called Leifsbudir, Leif's Booths in the sagas, though the connection between the legendary Vinland and this archaeological site remains a matter of scholarly debate. What cannot be debated is the evidence scattered across this wind-swept meadow. The unmistakable remains of Norse buildings, artifacts that could only have been made by European hands, and most remarkably, the remnants of a smithy where bog iron was smelted into nails and tools. I stand where the great hall once rose, its sod walls thick enough to keep out the bitter North Atlantic winds. The building was modest by Norse standards, perhaps 60 feet long and 40 feet wide, but it represented something extraordinary. The first European structure built on American soil. Inside these walls, Viking families ate meals prepared over central hearths, told stories during the long winter nights, and planned expeditions to explore the coastlines of this vast new continent. The archaeological evidence tells a story of careful planning and systematic exploration. This was no accidental landing by storm-tossed sailors, but a deliberate attempt at colonization. The Norse brought everything they needed to establish a permanent settlement: livestock, tools, household goods, and most importantly, the knowledge and skills to adapt their traditional way of life to an unfamiliar environment. In the smithy, archaeologists found slag and iron fragments that speak of industry and ambition. The Norse were smelting bog iron, a resource abundant in the local wetlands, and forging it into the nails, rivets, and tools essential for maintaining their ships and buildings. This was sophisticated metallurgy, requiring knowledge of temperatures, timing, and technique that the indigenous peoples of North America had not yet developed. The discovery of a bronze cloak pin, green with age but still recognizable as Norse craftsmanship, provides another link to the world these settlers had left behind. Such pins were not merely functional, but served as symbols of status and identity. That someone wore this pin in Vinland suggests they maintained their cultural connections even at the edge of the known world. But perhaps the most poignant artifact is a spindle whorl, a small stone disc used in spinning wool into thread. This humble tool speaks of women's presence in the settlement, of the domestic activities that transform a temporary camp into a home. Someone sat in this hall during the long northern evenings, spinning wool by firelight while listening to the wind howl across the barrens. The spindle whorl reminds us that exploration and settlement were not exclusively male enterprises. Entire families risked everything to build new lives in this distant land. The layout of the settlement reveals careful thought about defense and daily life. The buildings are positioned to take advantage of natural windbreaks while maintaining clear sightlines to the sea and surrounding countryside. Storage buildings, workshops, and living quarters are arranged in a pattern that would have been familiar to any Norse settler, creating a pocket of Scandinavian civilization on the shores of the New World. Yet, for all their preparation and skill, the Norse settlement at Lanso Meadows was short-lived. The archaeological evidence suggests occupation for perhaps a decade, maybe less. The reasons for abandonment remain mysterious. Was it conflict with indigenous peoples, as the sagas suggest? Difficulty obtaining supplies from Greenland? Simple homesickness for the familiar landscapes of Iceland and Norway? The indigenous peoples of the region, ancestors of the modern Mi'kmaq and Beothuk, left their own traces in the archaeological record. Stone tools and other artifacts suggest contact between the two cultures, though whether this contact was peaceful trade or violent confrontation remains unclear. The sagas speak of both. Initial curiosity and exchange, followed by misunderstanding and bloodshed. I walk to the edge of the site, where the land drops away toward Ipav's Bay. From here, the Norse could watch for ships arriving from Greenland, bringing news from home and supplies for the settlement. But those ships came less and less frequently as the years passed, until finally they stopped coming altogether. The settlers faced a choice: remain isolated in this distant land, or abandon their American dreams and return to the familiar hardships of Greenland. The indigenous peoples of the region, ancestors of the modern Mi'kmaq and Beothuk, left their own traces in the archaeological record. Stone tools and other artifacts suggest contact between the two cultures, though whether this contact was peaceful trade or violent confrontation remains unclear. The sagas speak of both: initial curiosity and exchange, followed by misunderstanding and bloodshed. I walk to the edge of the site, where the land drops away toward Ipav's Bay. From here, the Norse could watch for ships arriving from Greenland, bringing news from home and supplies for the settlement. But those ships came less and less frequently as the years passed, until finally they stopped coming altogether. The settlers faced a choice: remain isolated in this distant land, or abandon their American dreams and return to the familiar hardships of Greenland. They chose to leave, but they left behind more than buildings and artifacts. They left proof that the official story of American discovery is incomplete, that the narrative of Columbus as the first European to reach the New World is a convenient fiction. 500 years before the Genoese navigator set foot in the Caribbean, Norse families were building homes, raising children, and forging iron on the shores of North America. The wind picks up, carrying the salt scent of the sea and the earthy smell of the bog where the Norse once harvested iron ore. I imagine Leif Erikson standing on this same spot, looking out over waters that connected him to Greenland, Iceland, and ultimately to the fjords of Norway, where his ancestors first learned to build ships and read the stars. The stones beneath my feet have witnessed the rise and fall of the first European settlement in America. They have kept faith with history through centuries of forgetting, waiting patiently for archaeologists to uncover their secrets and restore their story to its rightful place in the human record. As the mist finally lifts, revealing the full sweep of the bay and the distant mountains beyond, I understand that this place is more than an archaeological site. It is a bridge across time, connecting us to the courage and ambition of people who dared to sail beyond the edge of their known world in search of something better. The Pacific stretches endlessly before me, its surface rippling like hammered silver under the tropical sun. I am aboard a traditional Polynesian voyaging canoe, feeling the hull flex and breathe with each swell as we ride the ocean's rhythm. The year could be 1200 AD, or perhaps earlier. Time moves differently here, measured not in calendar dates, but in the eternal dance between wind, wave, and star. My companions are the greatest navigators the world has ever known, though history will barely remember their names. They read the ocean like a vast book written in currents and clouds, in the flight patterns of birds and the phosphorescence of plankton.
These are the people who discovered and settled every habitable island in the Pacific, from Easter Island to Hawaii, from New Zealand to Tahiti, an achievement that makes Columbus's single Atlantic crossing seem like a weekend sailing trip. The navigator sits in the stern, his weathered hands steady on the steering paddle. His name is lost to time, but his knowledge spans generations. He learned to read the stars from his grandfather, who learned from his grandfather before him, in an unbroken chain of oceanic wisdom stretching back to the first brave souls who pushed their canoes beyond the sight of land. He points to a subtle change in the wave pattern, invisible to my untrained eye. Land, he says simply, though the horizon shows nothing but endless blue. He is reading the wave refraction patterns created by a distant island, interpreting the ocean's secret language with the casual expertise of a scholar reading familiar text. The canoe itself is a marvel of engineering and artistry. Twin hulls connected by a flexible platform, it rides over the waves rather than fighting through them. The sail is woven from pandanus leaves, its triangular shape perfectly designed to catch the trade winds that blow steadily across these latitudes. Every rope, every joint, every curve of the hull represents centuries of accumulated knowledge about how to survive and thrive on the world's largest ocean. But we are not heading for just any island. Our destination lies far to the east, beyond the normal range of Polynesian exploration, in waters that touch the shores of South America. This is a journey that official history claimed was impossible until genetic evidence proved it had actually happened. Contact between Polynesian navigators and the indigenous peoples of the Americas, centuries before any European dreamed of crossing the Atlantic. The evidence for this contact is written in sweet potatoes and chicken bones, in DNA sequences and linguistic similarities. The sweet potato, native to South America, was being cultivated across Polynesia long before European contact. The Polynesian word for this vital crop, kumala, bears striking resemblance to its Quechua names, kumara and kumal. This is not coincidence, but proof of ancient contact, of meetings between peoples separated by the world's largest ocean. As we sail eastward, following the path of the sun toward its daily death, I imagine the courage required for this journey. Unlike the Norse, who could island hop across the North Atlantic, these Polynesian navigators faced thousands of miles of open ocean with no guarantee of finding land. They carried their entire world in these fragile vessels: families, livestock, seeds, tools, and the accumulated wisdom of their ancestors. The navigator's daughter sits beside him, learning the ancient arts that will one day make her a master navigator in her own right. She watches the stars with the intensity of a student memorizing sacred texts, because for her people, the stars are sacred texts, a celestial map that guides them across the trackless ocean. She points to a constellation rising in the east. "That star will guide us to the land where the sun is born," she says, using the poetic language that helps navigators remember complex astronomical relationships. These are not mere directions, but sacred knowledge passed down through generations of ocean wanderers who trusted their lives to the reliability of celestial mechanics. The wind shifts, and the crew adjusts the sail with practiced efficiency. These are not professional sailors, but entire communities on the move. Men, women, children, elders, all committed to the dangerous enterprise of finding new homes across impossible distances. The women tend to the precious cargo of plants and animals that will seed new islands. The men manage the sailing and navigation. The children learn by watching, absorbing the skills they will need to continue their people's expansion across the Pacific. As night falls, the ocean transforms into a mirror of the heavens. The navigator begins his star compass, a mental map that divides the horizon into 32 directional points, each marked by the rising and setting positions of specific stars. This is navigation without instruments, relying entirely on human memory and the unchanging patterns of the cosmos. But the stars are only part of the story. The navigator also reads the ocean itself, the color of the water, the patterns of clouds, the behavior of seabirds, even the taste of the spray. He knows that certain types of clouds form over land, that birds fly in predictable patterns when returning to their roosts, that phosphorescent plankton create different patterns in different waters. A frigate bird appears on the horizon, its distinctive silhouette unmistakable against the darkening sky. The navigator smiles. Frigate birds never venture more than 100 miles from land, and their flight path points toward their roosting islands. We are close to our destination, though it remains invisible beyond the curve of the Earth. The genetic evidence tells us that this contact between Polynesians and South Americans occurred around 1200 AD, roughly 2 centuries after the Vikings established their short-lived settlement in Newfoundland. But while the Norse abandoned their American venture, the Polynesians maintained their connection across the Pacific, carrying sweet potatoes back to their island homes and leaving traces of their DNA in the coastal populations of Colombia and Ecuador. I watch the navigator's face in the starlight, seeing the concentration of a man performing calculations that would challenge a modern computer.
He is triangulating our position, using star positions, wave patterns, and bird behavior, maintaining a mental map of our location that is accurate to within a few miles after days of sailing across featureless ocean. This is exploration at its purest, not the conquest and colonization that would characterize European expansion, but the patient, methodical expansion of human presence across the planet's most challenging environment. These navigators were not seeking gold or glory, but simply new homes for their growing populations, new islands where their children could build lives and raise families. The canoe rises and falls with the ocean swells, carrying us toward a meeting that will leave its mark in the genetic record of 2 continents. Somewhere ahead, beyond the star-drunk horizon, lies the coast of South America, and a rendezvous with history that the world will not understand for another 800 years. The laboratory is quiet, except for the hum of sophisticated equipment, machines that can read the deepest secrets written in human cells. I stand before a computer screen displaying genetic sequences, strings of letters that represent the molecular history of our species. The data before me tells a story more remarkable than any saga or legend. Dr. Elena Moreno adjusts her glasses as she points to specific sequences on the screen. Her voice carries the excitement of a detective who has just solved a centuries-old mystery. "Look at this," she says, highlighting a particular genetic marker. "This DNA signature appears in both Polynesian populations and indigenous South Americans. But here's the remarkable part. Our analysis shows this admixture occurred around 1200 AD, 3 centuries before Columbus ever set sail."
The sweet potato sits innocuously on the lab bench beside us, its humble appearance belying its revolutionary importance to our understanding of ancient exploration. This unassuming tuber has become the Rosetta Stone of pre-Columbian contact, its genetic signature and linguistic trail providing irrefutable evidence of trans-Pacific voyaging that scholars once dismissed as impossible. I pick up the sweet potato, feeling its weight in my palm. This plant, scientifically known as Ipomea batatas, is native to South America. Yet archaeological evidence shows it was being cultivated across Polynesia long before European contact. The traditional explanation that Europeans introduced it during the colonial period crumbles when confronted with radiocarbon dating of pre-Columbian sweet potato remains found in Polynesian archaeological sites. The linguistic evidence is equally compelling. Across the vast expanse of Polynesia, from Easter Island to Hawaii, the sweet potato is known by variations of the word kumala. In the Andes, where the plant originated, the Quechua people call it kumara or kumal. This similarity is too striking to be coincidental, too consistent across different Polynesian languages to be explained by chance borrowing. Dr. Moreno pulls up another screen showing a map of the Pacific with genetic flow patterns marked in different colors. The DNA evidence is even more conclusive, she explains. We've identified specific genetic markers that show direct contact between Polynesian populations and indigenous South Americans. This isn't ancient shared ancestry from the original peopling of the Americas. This is recent contact occurring well within the historical period. The implications are staggering.
While Europeans were still convinced that the Atlantic was the only route to the New World, Polynesian navigators were routinely crossing the Pacific, an ocean 3 times larger than the Atlantic, and making contact with American populations. They were not only reaching the Americas, but establishing ongoing relationships,
trading plants and genes across thousands of miles of open ocean. I'd examined the genetic data more closely, seeing the molecular signatures of ancient meetings between peoples. Each DNA sequence represents a human story. A Polynesian navigator falling in love with a South American woman. Children born of unions between peoples separated by the world's largest ocean. Families that bridged continents through their very existence. The chicken bones tell another part of this story. Archaeological excavations in Chile have uncovered pre-Columbian chicken remains with DNA signatures matching Polynesian chickens rather than European breeds. These birds, found in contexts dating to before 1500 AD, provide additional evidence of trans-Pacific contact. The Polynesians brought more than sweet potatoes to the Americas. They brought an entire agricultural package, including the domesticated animals that would help sustain their long voyages. Dr. Moreno shows me photographs from recent excavations on Easter Island, where archaeologists have found evidence of South American contact in the form of obsidian tools made from volcanic glass that originated in the Andes. The exchange went both ways, she explains. Polynesians weren't just reaching South America. They were bringing South American materials back to their island homes. The genetic analysis reveals the precise timing and nature of these contacts. The DNA evidence suggests a single major contact event around 1200 AD, followed by ongoing but limited interaction over several centuries.
This wasn't a one-time accidental encounter, but a sustained relationship between Polynesian navigators and South American coastal peoples. I study the computer models that track the spread of genetic markers across the Pacific. The data shows that the initial contact occurred somewhere along the coast of present-day Colombia or Ecuador, then spread eastward across Polynesia as far as Easter Island and the Marquesas. The genetic signature is strongest in eastern Polynesian populations, those closest to South America, and becomes progressively weaker as it spreads westward across the Pacific. The implications for our understanding of pre-Columbian America are profound. These genetic exchanges occurred during the height of several South American civilizations: the Chimu, the Nazca, the various cultures that would eventually be conquered by the Inca. The Polynesian navigators were making contact with sophisticated societies, not primitive hunter-gatherers. Dr. Moreno pulls up images of Polynesian voyaging canoes, their elegant lines designed for long ocean passages. These vessels were perfectly adapted for trans-Pacific voyaging, she explains. They could carry entire families, livestock, and supplies for months at sea. The Polynesians weren't just reaching the Americas by accident. They were conducting planned expeditions with the intention of establishing contact and trade relationships. The sweet potatoes journey from South America to Polynesia represents one of the most remarkable examples of ancient plant dispersal in human history. Unlike many crops that spread gradually through trade networks, the sweet potato made a single dramatic leap across the Pacific, carried by navigators who understood its value and potential. I examined samples of ancient sweet potato DNA, extracted from archaeological specimens found in Polynesian sites.
The genetic analysis shows that all Polynesian sweet potatoes derive from a single South American source population,
confirming that this was a deliberate introduction rather than multiple independent contacts. The timing of this contact is particularly significant. The 13th century was a period of expansion and exploration for Polynesian societies. They were settling the last habitable islands of the Pacific, pushing the boundaries of human exploration to their absolute limits. The contact with South America represents the culmination of this expansion, the moment when Polynesian navigators finally bridged the gap between the Old World and the New. The genetic evidence also reveals something unexpected about the nature of these contacts. Rather than brief encounters between male explorers and local populations, the DNA patterns suggest more sustained relationships, possibly including Polynesian women settling in South America, or South American women joining Polynesian voyaging communities. As I leave the laboratory, carrying with me the weight of these revelations, I realize that the sweet potato has become more than just a crop. It has become a symbol of human ingenuity and courage, proof that our ancestors were capable of achievements that we are only now beginning to understand. The humble tuber in my hand connects me to navigators who crossed impossible distances, guided only by stars and intuition, to meetings between peoples that occurred in the shadow of the Andes and on the beaches of remote Pacific islands, to a chapter of human history that was written in DNA long before it was written in books. The tavern reeks of wine and unwashed bodies, its stone walls slick with Mediterranean humidity and the accumulated breath of countless conspirators. I sit in a shadowed corner of a Genoese waterfront establishment, the year perhaps 1350. Watching weathered sailors lean across scarred wooden tables to share secrets that could reshape the world's understanding of itself. The man speaking in hushed tones has the sun-darkened skin and calculating eyes of someone who has spent decades reading wind patterns and ocean currents. His name is lost to history, but his knowledge burns bright in the smoky air between us. He speaks of lands beyond Greenland, of coastlines rich with timber and furs, of waters where cod swim so thick a man could walk across their backs. The Norse have known of these lands for generations, he whispers, his Ligurian accent thick with wine and secrecy. My grandfather traded with Icelandic merchants who spoke of Vinland as casually as they mentioned the Faroe Islands. But they guard their knowledge jealously, these northern men. They have no love for southern sailors who might compete for their distant riches. I lean closer, inhaling the mixture of salt spray and conspiracy that clings to his weathered cloak. This is knowledge that predates Columbus by more than a century. Information that circulated through the maritime networks of the Mediterranean like contraband silk. The official histories will never record these conversations, these fragments of intelligence that filtered south through trade routes and tavern gossip. Another sailor joins our table, his movements careful and deliberate. He carries himself with the authority of a ship's captain, someone accustomed to making life and death decisions in the space between one wave and the next. His eyes hold the peculiar intensity of men who have seen things they cannot easily explain. I sailed with a Flemish captain who claimed to have charts, he says, his voice barely audible above the tavern's din. Maps that showed lands west of Ireland, beyond the edge of every official charts. He said they came from a monastery in Iceland, copied from older documents that the monks claimed dated back to the time of Leif Erikson. The mention of charts sends a thrill through the assembled sailors. In an age when accurate maps mean the difference between profit and death, between discovery and disaster, cartographic knowledge is more valuable than gold. These men trade in rumors and half-truths, but they also deal in the hard currency of navigational intelligence. A third man produces a piece of parchment from beneath his cloak, unfolding it carefully on the wine-stained table. The document is covered with symbols and notations in multiple hands, a palimpsest of maritime knowledge accumulated over decades of careful observation. Coastlines are sketched in uncertain strokes, with annotations in Latin, Norse, and what might be Arabic. This came from a Majorcan cartographer, he explains, tracing the coastlines with a finger stained by years of rope work. He claimed it was based on information from northern traders, men who had actually sailed these waters. Look here, this coastline matches descriptions I've heard from Icelandic merchants. And here, these islands, they correspond to lands mentioned in the old sagas. The map shows a coastline extending far to the west of Greenland, with notations indicating forests, rivers, and what appear to be harbors suitable for landing ships. The level of detail suggests more than casual knowledge. This is information compiled by people who had actually explored these waters, who had mapped these coasts through direct observation rather than speculation. I study the faces around the table, seeing the hunger that drives all great explorers, not just the desire for wealth, though that is certainly present, but the deeper need to know what lies beyond the horizon.
These men are part of a maritime culture that has been pushing the boundaries of the known world for centuries, following trade routes that stretch from the Baltic to the Black Sea, from Gibraltar to the Golden Horn. The conversation turns to practical matters: wind patterns, ocean currents, the seasonal movements of fish and whales that might guide navigators across trackless waters. These sailors speak with the casual expertise of professionals discussing their craft, but their knowledge encompasses secrets that official geography will not acknowledge for another century. The currents are the key, explains the first sailor, sketching invisible patterns on the table with his finger. The northern route follows the ice edge, where the cold water meets the warm. Follow it west from Iceland, and it will carry you to these distant shores. The Norse have known this for generations. It's how they reached Greenland and how they pushed even further west. A Dominican friar enters the tavern, his brown robes marking him as a man of learning in an age when literacy is rare and precious. But this is no ordinary monk. His hands are stained with ink, and his eyes hold the sharp intelligence of someone who collects information as systematically as others collect coins. I have been corresponding with brothers in Iceland, he says without preamble, settling onto the bench beside us. They possess manuscripts that speak of lands beyond Greenland, territories that the Norse call Helluland, Markland, and Vinland. These are not mythical places, but real coastlines, mapped and named by men who walked their shores. The friar produces a small leather-bound notebook, its pages covered with careful script in multiple languages.
He has been collecting information about these Western lands for years, corresponding with monasteries across Northern Europe, gathering fragments of knowledge that official scholarship ignores or dismisses. The most remarkable document, he continues, is a chronicle from a monastery in Norway. It describes expeditions to Vinland that continued for decades after Leif Erikson's initial voyage. The monks speak of timber harvests, of trade with indigenous peoples, of settlements that lasted for generations before being abandoned. This information circulates through networks that exist parallel to official channels, maritime guilds, monastic correspondence, the informal intelligence networks that connect merchants and sailors across vast distances. Knowledge flows like water, finding its way through the smallest cracks in the edifice of official ignorance. The implications are staggering. If these accounts are accurate, then European knowledge of the Americas extends back not just decades, but centuries before Columbus. The discovery of 1492 becomes not a breakthrough, but a rediscovery, the recovery of knowledge that had been lost or deliberately suppressed. As the evening deepens and the wine flows more freely, the conversation becomes more speculative, but no less fascinating. These men speak of Chinese junks spotted in northern waters, of Arabic texts that describe lands beyond the Western Ocean, of African navigators who may have crossed the Atlantic centuries before any European attempted the journey. The tavern keeper calls for closing time, but the conversation continues in whispers as the sailors prepare to return to their ships. They exchange final pieces of information, trading rumors and observations like merchants haggling over precious goods. Each man leaves with more knowledge than he brought, carrying fragments of a larger truth that official history will not acknowledge for generations. I follow them into the narrow streets of medieval Genoa, where the salt wind carries whispers of distant shores and impossible voyages. Somewhere in this maze of stone and shadow, a young man named Cristoforo Colombo is perhaps already dreaming of Western lands, unaware that the knowledge he seeks is already circulating through the taverns and monasteries of his native city. The morning mist rises from the Pearl River like incense from a temple altar, carrying with it the scent of sandalwood and distant spices. I stand on the deck of a massive treasure ship, its hull painted in imperial red and gold, watching the port of Nanjing fade into the haze behind us. The year is 1421, and I am sailing with the greatest naval expedition in human history, Admiral Zheng He's seventh and final voyage into the unknown waters of the world. The ship beneath my feet is a marvel that dwarfs anything Europeans will build for centuries to come. Nearly 400 feet long and 160 feet wide, this treasure ship is more floating palace than mere vessel. Its 9 masts tower above us like the pillars of heaven, their silk sails billowing with wind that tastes of adventure and imperial ambition. Admiral Zheng He himself stands at the bow, a giant of a man whose presence commands respect from the thousands of sailors, soldiers, merchants, and diplomats who make up this floating city. Born Mahe, a Muslim from Yunnan province, he was captured as a child and castrated to serve in the imperial court. Now he commands the largest naval force the world has ever seen, carrying the power and prestige of the Ming dynasty to the farthest corners of the earth. The fleet stretches to the horizon. Over 300 vessels of various sizes and purposes. There are warships bristling with cannons and armed marines, supply ships loaded with provisions for months at sea, troop transports carrying soldiers to establish Chinese presence in distant lands, and smaller vessels designed for coastal exploration and river navigation. But it is the treasure ships that capture the imagination, massive vessels designed to display Chinese wealth and technological superiority to foreign rulers. Their holds are filled with porcelain, silk, tea, and precious metals, gifts intended to establish tributary relationships with distant kingdoms. These ships are diplomacy made manifest, soft power projected across the world's oceans through superior seamanship and overwhelming display. I watch the crew work with practiced efficiency, men who have sailed these ships across the Indian Ocean to India, Ceylon, the Persian Gulf, and the eastern coast of Africa. They navigate by compass and star charts, using instruments and techniques that European sailors will not master for generations. The Chinese invented the magnetic compass, developed sophisticated star maps, and perfected the art of watertight compartments that make their ships virtually unsinkable. The official records speak of 7 voyages between 1405 and 1433, expeditions that established Chinese presence from Southeast Asia to the eastern coast of Africa. But there are whispers, rumors, fragments of evidence that suggest some of these fleets ventured even further, across the Pacific to the western shores of the Americas, decades before Columbus crossed the Atlantic. Master Navigator Liu stands beside me, his weathered hands steady on an astrolabe as he calculates our position. He has sailed with Zheng He on 5 previous voyages, mapping coastlines and recording ocean currents with the methodical precision of a scholar. His charts show waters that no European has ever seen, islands and coastlines that will not appear on Western maps for centuries. Master Navigator Liu stands beside me, his weathered hands steady on an astrolabe as he calculates our position. He has sailed with Zheng He on 5 previous voyages, mapping coastlines and recording ocean currents with the methodical precision of a scholar. His charts show waters that no European has ever seen, islands and coastlines that will not appear on Western maps for centuries. The ocean is vast, but not infinite, he says, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of a man who has pushed the boundaries of the known world. Follow the currents and the stars, and they will carry you to lands beyond imagination. The earth is round, as our scholars have long known. Sail far enough in any direction, and you will find new shores. The theory that Chinese fleets reached the Americas before Columbus rests on tantalizing fragments of evidence. Genetic markers in Native American populations that suggest Asian contact, linguistic similarities between Chinese and indigenous American languages, and most intriguingly, maps that appear to show American coastlines decades before European exploration. I examine one such map, carefully preserved in the ship's chart room. The document, attributed to Admiral Zheng He's cartographers, shows coastlines that bear striking resemblance to the western shores of North and South America. The level of detail suggests direct observation rather than speculation. Harbors are marked, river mouths noted, coastal features recorded with the precision of experienced navigators. The genetic evidence is equally compelling. Some Native American populations, particularly along the Pacific coast, carry genetic markers that suggest contact with Asian populations during the historical period. These markers are distinct from the ancient Asian ancestry that all Native Americans share, suggesting more recent contact, possibly during the era of Chinese maritime exploration. The linguistic connections are more controversial, but no less intriguing. Certain words in indigenous American languages bear striking resemblance to Chinese terms, particularly words related to navigation, metallurgy, and agriculture. Critics argue these similarities could be coincidental, but supporters point to the systematic nature of the correlations and their concentration in coastal populations.
As our fleet sails westward into the Pacific, I imagine the courage required for such a journey. Unlike the relatively narrow Atlantic that Columbus would cross, the Pacific stretches for thousands of miles without the comfort of island chains to guide navigation. Chinese sailors venturing into these waters would be committing to months at sea, with no guarantee of finding land. But the Chinese were uniquely equipped for such voyages. Their ships were larger and more seaworthy than anything Europeans possessed. Their navigational instruments more sophisticated, their understanding of ocean currents and wind patterns more advanced. If any civilization of the 15th century could have crossed the Pacific, it was the Chinese under the Ming Dynasty. The treasure ships carry more than trade goods and diplomatic gifts. They carry the accumulated knowledge of Chinese civilization. Scholars and scientists accompany the fleet, recording observations about geography, astronomy, biology, and anthropology. These men are conducting systematic exploration, gathering information that will expand Chinese understanding of the world and its peoples. Master Lu shows me instruments that European navigators will not possess for decades. Sophisticated compasses that account for magnetic variation. Star charts that map the southern hemisphere with remarkable accuracy. And most remarkably, mechanical clocks that allow precise calculation of longitude. The Chinese are not simply sailing into the unknown. They are mapping it with scientific precision. The fleet's organization reflects the systematic nature of Chinese exploration. Each ship has specific responsibilities. Some focus on trade and diplomacy, others on military security, still others on scientific observation and mapping. This is exploration as state enterprise, backed by the full resources of the world's most advanced civilization. As night falls over the Pacific, I watch Chinese astronomers take star sightings with instruments of brass and jade. They are updating charts that already show more of the world than any European map, adding new observations to a body of knowledge that spans centuries of systematic exploration. The stars above us are the same stars that guide Polynesian navigators across these waters, the same celestial markers that will eventually guide European explorers to the Americas. But tonight they shine down on Chinese sailors who may already have seen the shores that Columbus will discover decades later. Whether Zheng He's fleets actually reached the Americas remains a matter of scholarly debate. The official Chinese records make no mention of such voyages, and the physical evidence, while intriguing, is not conclusive. But the possibility haunts the imagination, that Chinese treasure ships may have anchored in American harbors, that Chinese sailors may have walked American beaches, that the discovery of the New World was actually a rediscovery of lands already known to the Middle Kingdom. The wind fills our sails, carrying us deeper into the Pacific night, toward waters that may hold the answers to one of history's greatest mysteries. The trowel scrapes against something hard buried in the Canadian soil, producing a metallic ring that makes my heart skip. I am kneeling in an excavation pit at Point Rosé, Newfoundland, where satellite imagery has revealed what might be the remains of a second Norse settlement in North America. The morning sun casts long shadows across the dig site, illuminating fragments of the past that have waited centuries for this moment of revelation. Dr. Sarah Parkak brushes dirt away from the object with the delicate touch of a surgeon, her eyes bright with the excitement of discovery.
The metal fragment that emerges from the earth is clearly worked iron, not the crude bog iron that indigenous peoples occasionally smelted, but sophisticated European metalwork that speaks of advanced blacksmithing techniques. "This changes everything," she whispers, holding the artifact up to the light. The iron nail, green with age, but still recognizable, represents technology that should not exist in pre-Columbian North America. Indigenous peoples of the region worked with stone, bone, and wood, but they had not developed the complex metallurgy required to produce iron tools and fasteners. The excavation site spreads around us like an archaeological crime scene, each square meter carefully mapped and documented. Graduate students work with brushes and measuring tools, recording the precise location of every artifact, every soil change, every hint of human activity. This is not treasure hunting, but scientific archaeology, the patient reconstruction of lives lived centuries ago. I move to another section of the dig, where a different team has uncovered what appears to be the remains of a hearth. The stones are arranged in a pattern familiar from other Norse sites. A central fire pit surrounded by flat stones for cooking and metalwork. Charcoal samples from the hearth will be radiocarbon dated, providing precise chronological evidence for when this fire last burned. The most exciting discovery lies in a small workshop area where archaeologists have found slag, the waste product of iron smelting. This industrial debris tells a story of systematic metal production, of people who brought not just iron tools, but the knowledge and equipment necessary to maintain and repair them. The slag contains traces of bog iron, the local resource that Norse settlers learned to exploit for their metallurgical needs. Dr. Michael McCormick examines a fragment of worked wood, its surface showing clear tool marks from metal implements. "Look at these cut marks," he says, pointing to the clean, straight lines that only metal tools can produce. Stone axes leave a completely different signature, more crushing than cutting. This wood was shaped by iron tools, probably axes and adzes brought from Greenland or Iceland. The evidence extends beyond individual artifacts to patterns of land use that suggest European agricultural practices. Soil analysis reveals changes in pollen composition that indicate forest clearing and the introduction of non-native plants. These environmental signatures match patterns found at Lonso Meadows, suggesting similar activities by the same cultural group. A bronze fragment emerges from the soil, its green patina unmistakable even after centuries of burial. Bronze working was unknown among indigenous North American peoples before European contact, making this artifact a clear marker of Old World presence. The fragment appears to be part of a cloak pin or brooch, similar to examples found at other Norse sites. The archaeological team works with the precision of detectives, documenting every detail that might shed light on who lived here and when. Soil samples are collected for chemical analysis, looking for traces of human activity. Elevated phosphate levels that indicate cooking areas. Microscopic fragments of metal that suggest smithing. Pollen grains that reveal what plants grew here centuries ago. I watch as a specialist in ancient DNA extracts samples from organic materials found in the excavation. These samples will be analyzed for genetic signatures that might reveal the presence of European livestock, cattle, sheep, or pigs that the Norse brought with them to their American settlements. The genetic evidence could provide definitive proof of Norse presence, even if the archaeological record remains ambiguous. The discovery of a spindle whorl, identical to examples found at Lonso Meadows, suggests the presence of Norse women at the site. This small stone disc, used for spinning wool into thread, represents domestic activities that transform temporary camps into permanent settlements. Someone sat here centuries ago, spinning wool by firelight while listening to the wind howl across the Newfoundland barrens. But the most intriguing discovery is a fragment of jasper, volcanic glass that originated thousands of miles away in Iceland. This exotic material, found in a context that suggests it was worked into tools or ornaments, provides a direct link to the Norse homeland. The jasper could only have reached this site through human transport, carried by people who maintained connections across the North Atlantic. The excavation reveals evidence of contact between Norse settlers and indigenous peoples. Stone tools made from local materials are found alongside European artifacts, suggesting interaction and possibly trade between the two cultures. Some of the stone tools show modifications that suggest they were adapted for use with metal implements, handles shaped to accommodate iron blades, for example. Dr. Parkak shows me photographs from other potential Norse sites across the North American Arctic, locations where satellite imagery has revealed suspicious patterns that might indicate European presence. We're looking at the possibility of a much larger Norse presence in North America than previously imagined, she explains. Not just one or two settlements, but a network of sites extending across the Canadian Arctic. The implications are staggering. If these sites prove to be genuine Norse settlements, they would suggest that European presence in North America was more extensive and long-lasting than the brief occupation at Lonso Meadows. The Norse may have established a chain of settlements across the North American Arctic, maintaining contact with Greenland and Iceland for decades or even centuries.
I examine a collection of iron fragments that have been carefully cleaned and catalogued. Each piece tells part of the story. Nails that held buildings together, knife blades that prepared food and worked materials,
tools that maintain ships and equipment. This is the detritus of daily life, the mundane artifacts that reveal how people actually lived rather than how they wished to be remembered. The radiocarbon dates from the site cluster around 1000 AD, confirming that this activity occurred during the known period of Norse exploration in North America. But some dates extend later, suggesting that Norse presence in the region may have continued longer than previously thought. The latest dates approach 1200 AD, implying that European activity in North America may have persisted for 2 centuries before being abandoned. As the day's excavation ends and the team carefully covers the exposed areas with protective tarps, I reflect on the significance of these discoveries. Each artifact, each soil sample, each fragment of evidence adds to our understanding of pre-Columbian contact between Europe and America. The official story of Columbus as the first European to reach the New World becomes increasingly untenable in the face of mounting archaeological evidence. The iron nails and bronze fragments, the worked wood and smelting slag, the spindle whorls and jasper tools, all speak to a complex story of exploration, settlement, and cultural contact that predates Columbus by centuries. These artifacts are not just objects, but witnesses to encounters between worlds, evidence of the courage and ambition that drove people to cross impossible distances in search of new homes and opportunities. The Earth holds many secrets, and we have only begun to uncover them. The laboratory hums with the quiet intensity of scientific revelation, machines reading the deepest secrets written in the double helix of human existence. I stand before banks of computers displaying genetic sequences that tell stories more ancient and complex than any written chronicle. The data streaming across these screens represents the molecular archaeology of human contact. Evidence written in DNA that no amount of historical revisionism can erase. Dr. Iana Iosif adjusts the parameters on her analysis software, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with the practiced precision of someone who has spent years decoding the language of genes. The sequences she's examining come from indigenous populations across the Americas, samples that have been painstakingly collected and analyzed to understand the deep history of human migration and contact. What we're seeing here challenges everything we thought we knew about pre-Columbian isolation, she says, highlighting specific genetic markers on the screen. These DNA signatures tell us that the Americas were not the isolated continents that traditional history suggests. There were multiple contacts, multiple exchanges of genetic material between Old World and New World populations occurring centuries before Columbus. The most compelling evidence comes from Polynesian populations, where genetic analysis has revealed clear signatures of Native American ancestry dating to around 1200 AD. The DNA doesn't lie. It shows direct contact between Polynesian navigators and indigenous South Americans, contact that resulted in genetic exchange and the birth of children who carried the heritage of 2 continents in their cells. I examine the phylogenetic trees displayed on the monitors, branching diagrams that trace the relationships between different human populations across time. The patterns are unmistakable. Genetic lineages that should be separated by thousands of miles of ocean show clear evidence of recent mixing. genetic signatures that can only be explained by direct contact between populations. The mitochondrial DNA evidence is particularly striking.
This genetic material, passed down through the maternal line, shows that Polynesian women carried Native American genetic markers back to their island homes. The implications are profound. These were not brief encounters between male explorers and local populations, but sustained relationships that resulted in families, in children who grew up carrying the genetic heritage of both continents. Dr. Iosif pulls up another data set, this one focusing on Y chromosome markers that trace paternal lineages. The pattern here is more complex, she explains. We see evidence of both Polynesian men settling in South America and South American men joining Polynesian voyaging communities. This suggests reciprocal contact, ongoing relationships rather than one-time encounters. The genetic evidence extends beyond the well-documented Polynesian-South American contact. Some Native American populations, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, carry genetic markers that suggest contact with Asian populations during the historical period. These signatures are distinct from the ancient Asian ancestry that all Native Americans share, pointing to more recent contact, possibly during the era of Chinese maritime exploration. I study the computer models that track the spread of genetic markers across populations and through time. The algorithms can pinpoint when genetic mixing occurred, how it spread through populations, and even estimate the number of individuals involved in the original contact events. The precision is remarkable, science fiction made real through the power of modern genomics. The analysis reveals something unexpected about the nature of these ancient contacts. Rather than the violent conquests that would characterize later European colonization, the genetic evidence suggests more peaceful interactions. The DNA patterns show gradual mixing over multiple generations, indicating sustained coexistence rather than brief, violent encounters. Dr. Iosif shows me data from recent excavations of ancient burial sites where DNA has been extracted from skeletal remains dating back centuries. We can now trace genetic lineages through time, she explains. We can see how populations changed, how new genetic variants were introduced, how contact events affected the genetic landscape of entire regions. The most controversial findings involve possible European genetic markers in pre-Columbian Native American populations. Some studies have identified genetic variants that appear to be of European origin but predate known European contact. These findings remain hotly debated, with critics arguing that the markers could represent ancient shared ancestry or post-Columbian contamination. But the evidence continues to accumulate. Ancient DNA extracted from pre-Columbian mummies in South America has revealed genetic signatures that don't match known Native American lineages. Some of these variants appear to be of Polynesian origin, confirming the genetic evidence for trans-Pacific contact. Others remain mysterious, suggesting contact with populations whose identity remains unknown. The laboratory's ancient DNA facility operates under strict contamination protocols, with researchers working in sterile environments to prevent modern genetic material from corrupting ancient samples. Every precaution is taken to ensure the integrity of the data,
because the implications are so significant for our understanding of human history. I watch technicians extract DNA from a tooth found in a pre-Columbian archaeological context in Chile. The process is painstaking. The ancient genetic material is degraded and fragmented, requiring sophisticated techniques to amplify and sequence. But when successful, these analyses can provide direct evidence of the genetic makeup of ancient populations. The results from this particular sample are striking.
The DNA shows clear evidence of Polynesian ancestry in an individual who lived in South America centuries before European contact. This is not statistical inference, but direct evidence, the genetic signature of ancient contact written in the cells of someone who lived through these remarkable encounters. Dr. Yosef explains the broader implications of these findings. We're not just documenting individual contact events, she says. We're revealing a pattern of global connectivity that existed long before the so-called Age of Exploration. The world was never as isolated as we thought. Human populations were in contact across vast distances, exchanging genes, ideas, and technologies. The genetic evidence also sheds light on the demographic impact of these contacts. The DNA patterns suggest that some contact events involved substantial numbers of people, not just individual explorers, but entire communities. This challenges traditional narratives that portray pre-Columbian contact as rare and accidental. I examine data from modern populations that still carry the genetic signatures of ancient contact. In some Polynesian communities, up to 10% of the genetic material shows Native American ancestry. In certain South American populations, Polynesian genetic markers can be detected in significant frequencies. These are not trace signatures, but substantial genetic contributions that speak to meaningful demographic exchange. The temporal precision of genetic analysis allows researchers to correlate contact events with known historical periods. The major Polynesian South American contact event coincides with the height of Polynesian expansion across the Pacific. The possible Chinese genetic signatures align with the era of Zheng Hai's treasure fleets. The timing is too precise to be coincidental. As I leave the laboratory, carrying with me the weight of these genetic revelations, I understand that we are witnessing a revolution in our understanding of human history. The DNA evidence is rewriting the story of pre-Columbian contact, revealing a world that was far more connected than traditional histories suggest. The genetic code doesn't lie, doesn't embellish, doesn't serve political agendas. It simply records what happened, the meetings between peoples, the relationships that formed, the children who were born carrying the heritage of multiple continents in their very cells. In the language of genes, the story of pre-Columbian contact is written with absolute clarity, waiting for us to learn how to read it. The dusty archive room beneath the Vatican Library holds secrets that would rewrite history textbooks if anyone dared to acknowledge them. I sit surrounded by centuries-old manuscripts, their parchment pages yellow with age and heavy with the weight of suppressed knowledge. The air smells of old leather and forgotten truths, of stories that powerful institutions have chosen to bury rather than confront. Brother Francesco, the elderly archivist who has spent 40 years cataloging these forgotten documents, handles each manuscript with the reverence of a man who understands their explosive potential. His weathered fingers trace Latin text that speaks of lands beyond the Western Ocean, of voyages that predate Columbus by decades or even centuries. "The Church has always known," he whispers, his voice barely audible in the cathedral silence of the archive. "These documents have been here for centuries, gathering dust while the world celebrates Columbus as the great discoverer. But the truth has a way of surviving, even when it's inconvenient." Before me lies a manuscript dated 1347, written by a Franciscan friar who claims to have sailed with Norse expeditions to Vinland. The text describes in remarkable detail the coastlines of North America, the indigenous peoples encountered there, and the attempts to establish Christian missions among the native populations.
This is not legend or speculation, but eyewitness testimony, recorded by a man of God who had no reason to fabricate such accounts. The implications are staggering. If this document is authentic, it means that European knowledge of the Americas was not only widespread before Columbus, but was actively suppressed by ecclesiastical authorities who found it politically inconvenient. The narrative of Columbus as the first European to reach the New World served the interests of Spanish expansion and papal authority, a convenient fiction that justified conquest and colonization. Brother Francesco shows me another document, this one a letter from a Portuguese navigator to Pope Nicholas V, dated 1454. The letter describes lands discovered beyond the Western Islands, territories rich in gold and populated by peoples who had never heard the Christian gospel. The navigator requests papal permission to establish missions in these distant lands, suggesting that Portuguese knowledge of the Americas predated Columbus by nearly 4 decades. The Portuguese were master navigators, Brother Francesco explains, his voice heavy with the weight of hidden history. They had been pushing westward into the Atlantic for decades before Columbus. Their charts showed islands and coastlines that officially didn't exist. But they kept their knowledge secret, fearing that Spanish or English competitors might exploit their discoveries. I examine a collection of maps stored in a climate-controlled cabinet, their surfaces protected by sheets of acid-free tissue paper. These charts, attributed to various 14th and 15th century cartographers, show coastlines that bear striking resemblance to the eastern shores of North and South America. The level of detail suggests direct observation rather than speculation. Harbors are marked, river mouths noted, coastal features recorded with the precision of experienced navigators.
One map, attributed to the Genoese cartographer Angelino Delsert and dated 1339, shows what appears to be the Caribbean islands with remarkable accuracy. Another, created by the Majorcan mapmaker Abraham Crescas in 1375, depicts a large landmass west of the Atlantic that corresponds closely to the North American continent. These maps predate Columbus by more than a century, yet they show geographical knowledge that official history claims was impossible. The most controversial document is a papal bull issued by Pope Urban VI in 1378, granting spiritual authority over the lands beyond the Western Sea to a group of Franciscan missionaries.
The bull specifically mentions territories discovered by the faithful sons of the Church in their voyages beyond the Pillars of Hercules, suggesting that the Vatican was aware of American lands nearly 120 years before Columbus. Brother Francesco handles this document with particular care, understanding its potential to destabilize centuries of accepted history. This bull was never published, he explains. It remained in the papal archives, known only to a few high-ranking officials. The Church chose to forget about these early discoveries, finding it more convenient to support the Spanish claims based on Columbus's voyages. The archive contains dozens of similar documents, letters from explorers, reports from missionaries, navigational notes from sea captains, all describing lands and peoples that officially didn't exist until 1492. The consistency of these accounts, their geographical accuracy, and their provenance from reliable sources make them impossible to dismiss as fantasy or fabrication. I discover a particularly intriguing manuscript written by an Irish monk named Brother Brendan, dated 1421. The text describes a voyage across the Western Ocean to a land of great rivers and endless forests, where the monk claims to have established a small Christian community among the native peoples.
The geographical details match the North American coast with startling precision, including descriptions of specific landmarks that would not be officially discovered for another century. The suppression of this knowledge appears to have been systematic and deliberate. Documents that contradicted the official narrative were removed from circulation, hidden in archives, or simply destroyed. The few that survived did so by accident or through the efforts of individual scholars who recognized their historical importance. Brother Francesco shows me correspondence between various European monarchs discussing the Western lands decades before Columbus. A letter from King Henry VII of England to his Portuguese counterpart, dated 1486, mentions the territories beyond the ocean sea and discusses potential territorial claims. Another document from the court of France refers to the American islands in a context that suggests common knowledge among European elites. The economic implications of this suppressed knowledge are profound. If European powers had been aware of the Americas for decades or centuries before Columbus, then the entire narrative of accidental discovery and subsequent colonization becomes suspect. The age of exploration transforms from a period of brave discovery into a calculated expansion based on long-held geographical knowledge. I examine financial records from Genoese banking houses that show investments in Western ventures dating back to the 1440s. These documents suggest that Italian merchants were financing expeditions to lands that officially didn't exist, indicating widespread knowledge among European commercial elites. The religious implications are equally significant. If Christian missionaries were active in the Americas before Columbus, then the narrative of bringing Christianity to the New World becomes more complex.
Some indigenous American religious practices show striking similarities to Christian rituals, similarities that have been attributed to post-Columbian missionary activity, but might actually reflect much earlier contact. Brother Francesco carefully returns the manuscripts to their protective containers, each document a fragment of a larger truth that challenges everything we think we know about the discovery of America. "History is written by the victors," he says quietly, "but sometimes the truth survives in forgotten corners, waiting for someone brave enough to acknowledge it." As I leave the archive, carrying with me the weight of these revelations, I understand that the official story of American discovery is not just incomplete, but deliberately misleading. The evidence for pre-Columbian European knowledge of the Americas is overwhelming, hidden in plain sight in archives and libraries across Europe. The question is not whether Europeans knew about the Americas before Columbus, but why this knowledge was suppressed and how long the deception can be maintained in the face of mounting evidence. The truth, as Brother Francesco observed, has a way of surviving, even when it's inconvenient. The waves whisper secrets as they retreat from the shore, each one carrying fragments of stories that span millennia. I stand on a beach that could be anywhere. Newfoundland, where Viking fires once burned. The coast of Chile, where Polynesian navigators first glimpsed South American shores. Or perhaps the Caribbean, where Columbus believed he had reached the Indies. In this twilight hour, all shores become one, all times converge into a single moment of understanding. The sand beneath my feet holds the memory of countless footprints, indigenous peoples who walked these shores for thousands of years, Norse explorers seeking timber and adventure, Polynesian navigators following star paths across impossible distances, Chinese admirals commanding treasure fleets, Portuguese captains guarding secret knowledge, and yes, eventually Columbus himself, stumbling into a world that had been discovered and rediscovered countless times before. I close my eyes and feel the weight of all these stories, the accumulated evidence that has slowly emerged from archives and excavation sites, from DNA laboratories and linguistic studies. The official narrative of 1492 as the moment of first contact crumbles like a sandcastle before the incoming tide of truth. America was never discovered. It was always known, always connected to the wider world through threads of human courage and curiosity. The genetic evidence speaks with molecular certainty. Polynesian DNA in South American populations, Native American markers in Pacific Islanders, the chemical signatures of ancient meetings written in the very cells of their descendants. These are not statistical anomalies, but the biological record of human encounters, of relationships that bridged continents and created families whose heritage spans oceans. The archaeological fragments tell their own story. Iron nails in Canadian soil, sweet potatoes in Polynesian gardens, chicken bones with Asian DNA in Chilean middens. Each artifact is a messenger from the past, carrying proof that the world was never as isolated as we imagined. The boundaries between continents existed only in the minds of mapmakers. The ocean was always a highway, not a barrier. The documentary evidence, hidden in monastery archives and royal correspondence, reveals the systematic suppression of inconvenient truths. European elites knew about the Americas decades or centuries before Columbus, but found it politically expedient to maintain the fiction of accidental discovery.
The narrative of brave exploration masked calculated expansion based on long-held geographical knowledge. As the sun sinks toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, I think about the courage required for all these journeys. The Viking families who loaded their possessions into open boats and sailed beyond the edge of their known world. The Polynesian navigators who trusted their lives to star patterns and wave formations, crossing thousands of miles of open ocean with nothing but skill and faith. The Chinese admirals who commanded fleets larger than anything Europe would see for centuries, carrying the power of the Middle Kingdom to distant shores. Each of these expeditions required not just physical courage, but intellectual bravery, the willingness to challenge accepted boundaries, to sail beyond the comfortable limits of the known world. These explorers were driven by the same fundamental human impulse that would eventually carry our species to the moon and beyond: the need to know what lies over the next horizon. The indigenous peoples of the Americas were not passive recipients of these visits, but active participants in a complex web of cultural exchange. They traded with Norse settlers, shared agricultural knowledge with Polynesian navigators, and may have sailed their own vessels across the Pacific to establish contact with Asian civilizations. The story of pre-Columbian contact is not one of European discovery, but of human connection across seemingly impossible distances. The irony is profound. Columbus, celebrated as the great discoverer, was actually following routes that had been traveled for centuries. His discovery was really a rediscovery. His first contact was actually the latest in a long series of meetings between Old World and New. The irony is profound. Columbus, celebrated as the great discoverer, was actually following routes that had been traveled for centuries. His discovery was really a rediscovery. His first contact was actually the latest in a long series of meetings between Old World and New.